Looking back now, it's pretty clear to me that the cracks were there long before I ever bothered to notice them. We were the couple everyone assumed had it all figured out. We had a good life, a nice house, vacations when we felt like it, and a relationship that, on the surface, seemed pretty solid. Madeline and I had been together for years, and things didn't just fall apart overnight. But over time, that closeness we once had started to slip away. It happened slowly at first, little things I didn't pay much attention to. She started pulling away from the small moments we used to enjoy together, and there was this growing distance between us. I thought it was just a phase, maybe we'd gotten too comfortable or were in a bit of a rut. I convinced myself it was normal. Every couple goes through it, right? And then there was Zane. I'll admit it, when I first invited him over, it was purely for business. Madeline and I were looking to take our finances to the next level, and he came highly recommended by a friend. He seemed capable, confident in a way that wasn't too showy, but you could tell he knew what he was talking about. But something felt off when I saw Madeline paying more attention to him than usual. Normally, whenever finance stuff came up, her mind would wander, but this time, she was hanging on every word he said about investment strategies. I thought, well, this is new. But I figured, if she was genuinely interested in learning about our finances, who was I to stop her? A few days later, they started texting. And no, I wasn't snooping. I'm not that kind of guy. But when your wife is always glued to her phone, laughing at whatever Zane's texting her from across the room, it's hard not to notice. I asked her about it and she brushed it off like it was no big deal, saying it was just Zane sharing some tips and that he just has a way of explaining things. I told myself not to make a fuss about it. Maybe she was just trying to understand finances better, right? But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something about it just didn't feel right. Then she suggested we invite him to dinner. She said it was to thank him for all his help, which, okay, I could understand. Felt a bit much, but maybe I was overthinking it. So we went to this nice spot downtown. Madeline dressed up a little more than usual, and when Zane showed up, I saw her light up in a way I hadn't seen in months. The whole night, she was hanging on his every word, laughing at all his jokes, complimenting him non-stop on his unique perspective. At one point, she even leaned across the table to tell him how impressive his achievements were, practically glowing with admiration. I sat there, biting my tongue, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a third wheel. And then there was Lila, Madeline's best friend, who I'd always thought was a bit morally loose. She'd had her fair share of flings, even when her boyfriend was just down the hall. So when I overheard Lila telling Madeline to refresh her life a little, I knew exactly what she meant. And Madeline, instead of shutting her down, smiled like she was actually considering it. It might have been a joke, but it set off every alarm bell in my head. I didn't want to believe Madeline would ever stray. But these little things, these moments started adding up. Madeline's book club meetings that kept running later every week. The way she'd drop Zane's name into conversations like he was just a harmless acquaintance. I could see the change in her, this excitement every time he came up. One night, I asked her, keeping it casual, "So, Zane's really making an impression on you, huh?" She laughed it off, rolling her eyes like it was nothing. "Oh, stop being paranoid," she said, brushing me off like I was being ridiculous. But I couldn't ignore the way she looked at him, the way her eyes lingered just a little too long, the way she smiled just a little too brightly. It was in those moments that jealousy, real jealousy, crept up on me. And not the typical kind. This was the kind that eats away at you, making you replay every conversation, every smile, every laugh. It got to the point where I was starting to question my own sanity. Seeing them together that night, it was like everything came crashing down. I tried to hold it together on the way home, but my mind was spinning. Every laugh she shared with Zane, every look they exchanged, every time she turned away from me like I didn't exist. It all played on a loop in my head. By the time I parked the car, I felt like I was about to explode. So many questions, so much confusion, and I knew I couldn't keep this bottled up much longer. When she finally got home, it was like nothing had changed. She barely looked at me as she tossed her bag on the table and poured herself a glass of wine. My blood was boiling, but I tried to stay calm. I couldn't just accuse her without giving her a chance to explain, right? So, I took a deep breath and asked, "You said you were going out with Lila today, right?" She paused, then casually nodded. "Yeah, we were supposed to, but she got busy, so I just grabbed lunch by myself." I was stunned. She lied to me without blinking. My mind was screaming at me to confront her, to tell her I knew she'd been with Zane. But instead, I forced myself to nod and let it slide. I didn't want her to know that I was onto her. I needed to catch her in a lie that she couldn't just laugh off as paranoia. So, I pretended everything was fine, even though all I could see when she looked at me was the image of her with him, sharing moments that didn't include me. Over the next few days, the gap between us only seemed to widen. She grew colder, more distant, almost like I was invisible to her. The nights that used to be filled with conversation and laughter turned into nothing but this uncomfortable silence. I'd try to talk to her, but either she'd brush me off or respond with one-word answers. Felt like I was living with a stranger. The more I observed her, the more I began to notice little things that hadn't bothered me before, like how she always kept her phone angled away from me, or how she'd receive these mysterious calls in the middle of the night and step out of the room to answer them. One night, I hit my breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. So, I asked her directly, "What's going on with you and Zane?" I tried to sound casual, like I wasn't accusing her of anything, but she froze for a split second. In her eyes, I saw something. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by her usual deflection. "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're getting jealous over Zane. He's just a friend," she said, with that same dismissive tone, like I was being ridiculous for even bringing it up. "You're just being paranoid," she added, rolling her eyes before turning back to her phone. But I wasn't paranoid. I knew what I had seen, and I wasn't the only one who noticed something was off. A couple of days after our argument, Clayton called me up, wanting to grab a drink. The way he said it made me feel like it wasn't just a casual hangout. When I met him at the bar, I could tell something was weighing on him. He was already sitting there, nursing his drink, like he had something important to say. After the usual pleasantries, there was a long pause before he looked me in the eye and said, "Look, man, I didn't want to say anything, but I saw Madeline out with Zane again, and it didn't look like just a business meeting, if you know what I mean." Hearing it from him, that was the final blow. Clayton wasn't the type to stir the pot. If he was bringing this up, then it was serious. They were out together, laughing, leaning in close like they didn't have a care in the world. Clayton tried to downplay it, suggesting I talk to Madeline, give her a chance to explain. But I could barely hear him through the pounding in my head. All I could think about was the image of her betraying me, slipping away into some affair with a guy she barely knew. A few days later, fate threw me a cruel kind of gift. I had to come home early, and as I was driving through downtown, I saw them again. They were just walking out of a restaurant, laughing together, completely oblivious to the world around them. She had this glow about her, like a teenager in love for the first time, something I hadn't seen in years. I watched as she leaned into him, her hand brushing against his arm. The way he looked at her made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a friend. This was something more. Something I had been too blind to see before. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with anger, pain, and a sharp kind of clarity. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time, I couldn't ignore what was staring me in the face. My wife was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Every laugh, every touch, every shared glance. It all ran through my head like a nightmare, each moment more gut-wrenching than the last. When she finally came home that evening, I wanted to scream at her, confront her, but I held back. I needed to know just how deep this went. There's a point where doubt and suspicion start to eat away at you, making every thought feel like a dagger. I couldn't keep going like this, questioning everything, second-guessing every interaction, replaying every moment in my head. So, I did something I never thought I would. I hired a private investigator. It felt like giving up, like opening the door to someone who had no business being in the most private parts of my life. but I had no other choice. I couldn't just sit there while this sick game played out behind my back. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The investigator was professional, quiet, and didn't ask questions. I didn't give him the whole story, just enough for him to understand that I needed solid proof of what was happening between Madeline and Zane. And within a week, he delivered. I still remember the day I walked into his office. The dim light, the cold feeling in the air, and the sound of the manila folder being slid across the table. My hands trembled as I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. Madeline and Zane, sitting at a candlelit dinner, hands intertwined across the table. I stared at the picture, my mind numb with shock. They looked happy, intimate, like a couple with nothing to hide. Madeline was leaning in, her eyes bright, a smile on her face that I hadn't seen in years. It was as if she had saved that part of herself for him, leaving me with the hollow shell of the woman I used to know. There were more photos. Some showed them walking together, their bodies close, her head tilted up toward him like he was the only thing that mattered. With each photo, I felt my heart break a little more. And then there were videos, clips of them talking, laughing, even touching. One showed her reaching across the table to hold his hand, and he didn't pull away. They weren't hiding, not even trying to be subtle. It was a blatant betrayal for anyone to see. The investigator watched me in silence as I flipped through the photos. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I nodded, but I couldn't find the words. The truth was, I didn't need his sympathy. I needed answers. I needed justice. But sympathy? That wouldn't make this pain go away. The drive home felt like I was living in some twisted nightmare. Every image, every moment from that folder burned into my mind. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I needed a plan. Something that would make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. She wasn't walking away from this unscathed. That's when I decided to call Riley. Riley and I go way back. We used to work together in investments, and he knew finance better than anyone. We hadn't talked in a while, but he was one of the few people I still trusted. When I explained the situation to him, he didn't hesitate. "We'll set up a new account," he said, his voice cool and calculated. "Something she can't touch. If she's been using your money to fund this affair, we'll make sure she's got nothing left to fall back on." Over the next few days, Riley and I fine-tuned the details. We opened a secret account and began shifting funds little by little, making it appear like a smart financial move. Madeline, always so obsessed with appearances, didn't think twice. When I explained it was part of a strategy to secure our family's future, she didn't bat an eye. "Sounds like a good idea," she said, smiling, completely oblivious to the trap I was setting. I almost relished the moment, watching her sign everything off, trusting me to handle our finances while she continued her affair without a care. Once the financial aspect was under control, I shifted my attention back to her. I started pulling away, gradually at first just enough to make her notice. I made it clear I wasn't going to be her emotional punching bag anymore. Whenever she tried to speak to me, I gave her curt, dismissive answers. I didn't ask about her day or show any interest in what she was doing. At night, I'd turn my back on her, leaving her to stare at the ceiling, probably wondering what had gone wrong. I wanted her to feel the emptiness she'd created between us. I wanted her to realize I wasn't the clueless, trusting guy she thought I was. It didn't take long before she noticed the change. At dinner, she kept watching me closely, her eyes searching my face like I was some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. "Is everything all right?" she asked one night, her voice wavering slightly. I shrugged it off, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "Yeah, just a lot going on with work," I said. She didn't push it, but I could see the doubt creeping in. I could tell she was starting to feel the tension, that same unease I'd been living with for weeks. It was a small victory, but I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction watching her squirm. Over the next few days, she tried harder, making more of an effort to close the gap. But it was too late. Every time she tried to get closer, I stepped further away, keeping her in the dark. I could see the frustration in her eyes, but I didn't care. The best part? She had no idea why I was acting this way. She was playing her little game with Zane, thinking she had everything under control. But now the tables were turning. She was about to learn what happens when you betray the one person who trusted you. With the finances in place, I knew it was time to start making moves. I wasn't just going to let her off easy. I wanted her to feel the consequences of what she'd done to me, to understand how deep the wound went. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed people on my side, allies who understood that this wasn't just petty revenge. It was justice. Clayton was the first person I turned to. He'd seen it all from the beginning, and I knew he'd support me. We met at our usual bar, and as soon as I laid out my plan, he didn't hesitate. He leaned in, nodding as he listened. "You're doing the right thing, man," he said, his voice firm. "She needs to be exposed." His words grounded me. I could see in his eyes that he wasn't questioning my actions. He knew, just like I did, that Madeline had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I confided in a few other close friends in the days that followed, people I trusted to keep their mouths shut. Their reactions were a mix of disbelief and anger. They knew Madeline as my wife, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd once been my partner. Hearing about the betrayal with Zane shook them. They felt deceived too. We laid out the plan carefully, discussing every detail, making sure we were all on the same page. Meanwhile, Madeline was growing more unsettled. She'd watch me closely over dinner, her eyes scanning my face, trying to figure out what was going on. I could feel her trying to read me, trying to understand what had changed. It almost made me laugh. She was now experiencing the same anxiety and suspicion I'd been living with for weeks. One evening, I overheard her talking on the phone with Zane. Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I don't know Zane," she whispered, barely audible. "He's different now, distant." Zane, always the charmer, reassured her with a smooth, "It's just a phase. Soon, we'll be together. No more secrets, no more hiding." I clenched my fists, hearing his words like a fresh betrayal. They thought they were in the clear, that they'd outsmarted me. But they had no idea what was about to hit them. That's when I came up with the idea of the financial party. It was the perfect way to lure them in, to make them drop their guard. I sent out invitations to our mutual friends, even a few of Madeline's closest friends who had no idea what was really happening. I pitched it as an event to showcase a new investment opportunity, just formal enough to intrigue people but not raise suspicion. I made sure to mention Zane specifically, knowing that Madeline wouldn't miss the chance to bring him along. After all, she probably couldn't wait to flaunt her little secret in front of everyone. The night of the party, I went all out. I hired a caterer, set up a bar, and transformed the house to feel like an upscale event. I wanted everything to look polished, like the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. I even wore the suit she always liked, the one that used to make her smile, the one she'd once found irresistible. As guests started arriving, I greeted them with the perfect host smile, making sure to set the tone. I could see a few of them glancing around, sensing the tension but not understanding why it was there. Clayton was there too, giving me a knowing nod, his presence a quiet reassurance. Felt like the calm before a storm, like we were all waiting for something to give. Then Madeline arrived. She walked in with Zane by her side, both of them dressed to the nines, looking like they owned the place. Her arm was linked through his so casually, so brazenly. I watched them, how they looked at each other, how they touched, the subtle way they thought no one was noticing. They were comfortable, confident, and assuming I was still in the dark. She flashed me that practiced smile, the one she'd perfected over the years, and I returned it, matching her smile with one of my own. She didn't expect me to be so composed, so unbothered. As the night went on, I kept my eyes on them from across the room. My heart was pounding as they mingled, laughing and talking like they didn't have a care in the world. I let them think they were winning, that they were safe, that I didn't know anything. They were lost in their little world, too wrapped up in their own illusion to notice the subtle exchanges of glances between Clayton and me. I waited. I bided my time. I let them relax, letting them think they had me fooled. Finally, as the evening was winding down, I stood up to make my announcement. The room quieted as all eyes turned to me. I kept my expression steady, my tone calm, but inside, my heart was racing with a mix of fury and satisfaction. I took a deep breath and thanked everyone for coming, casually mentioning that I had something special I needed to share. Madeline and Zane were near the front, watching me with smug amusement, as if they were in on some private joke. They had no idea the joke was about to be on them. As I glanced over at them, my pulse quickened. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would finally expose them for the lies they'd been living. I looked out at the crowd of friends, colleagues, and Madeline's naive acquaintances, all of them thinking she was the perfect wife. Little did they know, tonight was the night everything would change. I reached for a small remote, my hand steady as I clicked a button, dimming the lights. The projector behind me whirred to life, casting a series of images onto the wall. "I'd like to share something personal with all of you," I said, keeping my voice even, though my insides were on fire. "Something you all deserve to know." The first image flashed onto the screen. A candid photo of Madeline and Zane, hands intertwined at a candlelit dinner. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as everyone shifted their gaze between the screen and Madeline, trying to process what they were seeing. Madeline's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing in shock, like she didn't know how to respond. Zane took a step back, his expression morphing from confusion to panic as more images appeared, each one more damning than the last. I stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the betrayal sink in. The room was dead silent, and I could feel the tension building, suffocating the space. Then, as the last photo faded from view, I turned to face her directly. "Madeline," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You've lied to me, to our friends, and to everyone who thought they knew you." Her eyes widened in disbelief, and she stammered, trying to form words. But I raised my hand, halting her before she could utter a single lie. Don't even try to talk your way out of this. You've been cheating on me with him." I pointed at Zane. "And you didn't even have the decency to hide it. You flaunted it, right in front of me, like I was too stupid to see it." She looked around the room, desperate for someone to come to her defense, but all she saw were the shocked and disgusted faces of people who had trusted her. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice quivering. "I didn't mean to. Ryland, please, you have to understand." "Understand?" I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "You betrayed me, Madeline. You took everything we had, everything we built together, and threw it away for him. And not only that," I continued, my voice growing colder, "you've been using my money to fund your affair, haven't you? Do you think I didn't know? All those dinners, the gifts, the nights out. I paid for every single one." Her face flickered with guilt, and for the first time, I saw a flash of real fear in her eyes. Zane stood there, frozen, realizing just how much trouble he was in. Some of the guests were his clients, and I could see them exchanging glances, their expressions turning to anger and disappointment. Zane, who had always been so smooth and confident, suddenly looked like a man who knew everything he'd built was crumbling down. One of his clients, a man I knew well, stepped forward and shook his head in disgust. "I trusted you, Zane," he said, his tone like ice, "but I can't do business with someone who has no respect for boundaries, or for the people he works with." One by one, others began to follow suit, some muttering to each other, others walking out without a word, all of them turned off by the sight of him. Zane's face turned ashen, and he opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked between me and Madeline, hoping for some miracle, some way out of this mess he had created. But there was no escape, and he knew it. Desperate, Madeline tried again, reaching for me as if to pull me back into her world of lies. "Ryland, please, we can talk about this. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her voice was cracking, her hands trembling as she tried to touch me, to manipulate me back into her web. But I was done. I was beyond saving, beyond forgiveness. I stood there, numb to her tears, only feeling a cold satisfaction that I was finally making her face the consequences. "I'm filing for divorce," I announced, my voice clear and unwavering. And don't think for a second that you'll get anything from me. I've already secured my assets. You'll be left with nothing." Her expression crumbled, the shock turning into panic as she realized the full weight of what she'd lost. "You betrayed me, Madeline. You destroyed everything we had. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it." A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by Madeline's quiet sobs as she sank into herself. I looked around at the guests, at the friends who had stood by me, who now knew the truth. "I'm sorry you had to see this," I said, nodding to those who had been there for me. "But it's time everyone knew who Madeline really is." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Madeline standing there, her world falling apart around her. She stood frozen, her lover humiliated, and the life she had so carelessly taken for granted unraveling in front of her eyes. I didn't need to look back. There was nothing left to see. Madeline's collapse was swift and unforgiving. The moment the divorce papers were filed, everything she'd once held dear began to slip away. Her polished social circles, the friends who once admired her, now avoided her like the plague. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Talk of her betrayal, her affair, and the shameless way she flaunted it all. At first, she tried to keep up appearances, pretending like everything was normal. She wore the same smile, posted the same photos, but it didn't take long for people to catch on. Invitations stopped coming. Her phone, once constantly buzzing, was now eerily silent. Madeline, who had thrived on attention and adoration, found herself isolated, her so-called friends now seeing her as nothing more than a cautionary tale. The financial fallout hit her harder than she probably ever imagined. For the first time in her life, she was standing on her own, and it wasn't pretty. She reached out to me, tried calling, tried sending desperate emails, but I ignored it all. Every message went straight to the trash. I knew her too well. I could almost predict the words she would use to excuse herself, the way she'd twist everything to make herself the victim. But I wasn't interested in hearing her pathetic rationalizations. She had burned her bridges, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. Then there was Zane. His fall from grace was almost poetic. The clients who'd walked out at the party were just the beginning. Word spread quickly, and before long, his reputation was in ruins. He was forced to resign from his position, taking a lesser job at a smaller firm just to keep afloat. Rumors swirled that he eventually moved to another city, hoping to leave the scandal behind. But no matter where he went, the stain would follow him. He'd forever be known as the guy who couldn't keep it professional, the one who ruined his life over a brief affair. The perfect romance with Madeline dissolved just as quickly as it had begun. As soon as his career started crumbling, he dropped her like a hot potato, cutting all ties with her and walking away just as suddenly as he had entered her life. Meanwhile, my life was taking a different turn. The investment I'd set up was paying off faster than I had anticipated. Every milestone, every profit, felt like a small victory, a reminder that I'd turned a nightmare into something positive. The business became more than just a financial success. It was a personal triumph. It was something I'd built from scratch, a testament to the fact that I was stronger than I had ever realized. Each success reinforced my sense of purpose, a reminder that I had survived, that I had come out on top while Madeline and Zane were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about taking control, about refusing to let her betrayal break me. I was carving out a future that was mine alone, one that had nothing to do with the past I had left behind. Clayton and my other friends were there every step of the way. Clayton, especially, had been my rock during the darkest times. Our regular hangouts became more than just distractions, they were lifelines. Through the quiet support, the words of encouragement, I began to rebuild myself. These friends, the real ones, had stuck by me when I couldn't even see a way out. Clayton's unwavering loyalty helped me regain my balance, reminding me that real friendship doesn't falter in times of crisis. Every toast, every quiet nod of understanding, was another brick in the wall that was slowly rebuilding my life. Looking back now, I realized that everything I went through forced me to confront the truth. I'd spent so long trying to maintain an image, trying to keep up appearances, that I overlooked the things that really mattered: trust, respect, and honesty. Madeline's betrayal shattered that illusion, and in doing so, it forced me to face my own flaws. I had let things slide for far too long, made excuses for her behavior, and ignored the warning signs. But now, after enduring the pain and the heartbreak, I can say with certainty that I'm stronger than I was before. I've been through the worst and come out the other side with a clarity and strength that I never had before. Now, looking at where I am, I feel a calm I never thought was possible. I'm free from the lies, the manipulation, and the hollow emptiness of a marriage that had long stopped being real. And as I look ahead, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I'm living my life on my own terms. The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer defines me. The pain and betrayal weren't in vain. They gave me the strength to rebuild, to start over, and create a life that is truly mine. And that freedom is worth everything.